Thanks, Thomas. It's really good to be back. Like Thomas said, I am a UCR alum, and I have a really deep connection to this university, the UC in general, and to California. A little bit of a background on myself, just to augment what Thomas was talking about. My interest in public policy and my action in public policy began when I was sitting in your seats as a student. I think quite often it's easy to get lost in a big campus like this one. Over 20,000 students, it can be difficult sometimes to understand how you might be able to make a difference, not just on your campus, but beyond it. I hope today that my talk will illustrate at least one path that you can take to making a difference on whatever issue it may be. When it comes to what I'm talking about today, it's going to be focused on higher education, it's going to be focused on student debt, and a new idea that we can use to alleviate student debt, or in my case, hopefully, end student debt. But I hope that you can apply the kinds of things that I'm talking about, the ways of thinking, the approaches to designing public policy, and to understanding public policy problems, and apply it to whatever you're most passionate about. Just talking to a few School of Public Policy students today, interests range widely, from global down to communities within our local communities. There's room for innovation everywhere. And hopefully by the end of our talk today, you'll not only walk away feeling some hope and ambition about what we can do in higher education, and particularly in student debt, but also when it comes to whatever projects or passions you might have. So I want to start off by talking about the problem. What are the issues facing higher education today? I'm sure all of you can tell me about it. It's multifaceted. There are a lot of things going on when we talk about higher education finance. And it starts with tuition and the price that you pay for higher education. So when you enroll in a college, there is a sticker price, something that the college expects you to be able to pay. There's a process that goes on determining how much you can afford to pay, how much you'll get in aid, how much you'll get in loans. And this is a process that dates back more than 50 years, when the President of the United States at the time signed the Higher Education Act, establishing the federal loan system, and looks a lot similar to what we have today. A lot has happened since the establishment of federal loans. Namely, tuition has skyrocketed. Okay. This is something that the UC is facing, but schools across the country are also facing, public and private, big and small. We're going to get into a little bit today why that happens and what we can do to stave that off. But one of the most concerning things is not just what tuition costs right now, but what it can cost in the future. Okay, one study took a look at where college tuition is right now, traced the trend line of how it's been increasing over the past 20 years or so, and predicted that even at top-tier colleges that are $60,000 per year today could start pushing six figures in a matter of years. One consequence of tuition rising is student debt. Student debt is the primary mechanism that many students use to be able to finance their education. Not just tuition, but everything that's included in that sticker price, whether that's tuition, fees, textbooks, room and board, transportation, food, anything that you might need. We take out student loans to cover it. Right now, student debt stands at $1.3 trillion across the country. That's greater than even credit card debt. 7 out of 10 students graduate with student debt. 7 out of 10. Those 7 students are graduating with an average of $30,000 in debt. And 1 out of 4 of those graduates are delinquent or in default, which is basically our way of measuring how many students are having trouble paying back their debt. Between 2004 and 2014, average student debt rose 56%, more than double the rate of inflation. This isn't something that we can just point to inflation as causing. There's a lot more going on here. So what does it mean when education is affordable? There's a lot of debate around that as well. The primary way that we measure affordability is something called the FAFSA. How many people in here know what the FAFSA is? You should hopefully all know what it means. This is the form that students fill out every year that determines how their family's finances factor into what they can afford to pay for college, based on your parental income. But it doesn't always work. 86% of families who get a $0 expected family contribution, that's the government saying, after filling out the FAFSA, you cannot afford to pay even a single cent, end up having to pay $5,000 or more. That, to me, displays a breakdown of this system. It is not working. Price aid loans are all determined by this means test, and we have 86% of students falling through the cracks. It's a pretty large crack. And what's peculiar about this system is that affordability is based on what your parents earn. But when 7 out of 10 students are graduating with student debt, that's their debt. Their parents' income does not determine their ability to pay back that debt after they graduate. And so what College 2.0 aims to do is bring some rationality into a system that clearly isn't working. And it started here. So back in the spring of 2011, I had just been named the editor-in-chief of The Highlander, which is the student newspaper here at UCR. And at that time, I was given the prestigious responsibility of informing the students that their tuition was going up. And I did not like having to do that. It's a difficult thing to do. The state had cut the University of California's financing by 30%, and then kept cutting. Tuition kept going up by approximately the same amount to make up the difference. But at the same time, as the editor of the newspaper, I had some access. I was able to talk to the governor. I was able to talk to the president of the UC and ask them directly, what are you doing to solve this problem? And so you can imagine I was pretty scared when I got the exact same answer from both of them. I called up Governor Brown, I called up the UC president at the time, Mark Udoff, and I asked, what kinds of creative solutions do you have to stop this crisis in its tracks, to stop tuition from skyrocketing, to make sure that students can continue to have access and be able to afford their college education? And the answer I got from both was, my hands are tied. There's nothing we can do. Talk to the other person. So I'm a student sitting there watching my tuition go up, and the people who are in charge of making these decisions with the power to do something about it say they can't do anything about it. So I hang up the phone, and I go and sit with the editorial board of the Highlander, and I start saying to them, look, every newspaper in the country is calling for creative solutions on their editorial pages. We can't just come out and say, we need creative solutions. Those in power don't have any. If they don't, the students might as well. Let's come up with our own. And so we sat down and we started to talk about what our ideal higher education system might look like. If the system were truly working the way it should, how would it? So we started thinking, okay, well, regardless of your family's background, you should be able to go to college if you want to, if that's something that you want to do. You should have access to that. It should not put you in debt. It should not keep you from buying a home, starting a business, starting a family once you graduate. You should be able to pursue whatever academic discipline that you want, whatever career that you want. And whatever solution that solves all of this, it should be permanent. It should be something that lasts. It shouldn't be a short-term fix. Because all we're hearing from politicians or short-term fixes. How do we get to next year, the year after that, the year after that? And we'll just keep on using Band-Aids and popsicle sticks and little things to try to make it all fit together, rather than really tackling the core issues. And so we came up with this plan called Fix UC. The goal was right there in the title. We wanted to fix the University of California's funding system. And the way that we propose doing that is by eliminating tuition. No more tuition. Now, on the face of it, that sounds kind of crazy. Like, how are you going to sell that to people? No more tuition. How is the school going to get funded? How is this going to work? Well, what we found was we can create a system in which a university is able to outlast another recession, another economic crisis, if we tailor what the institution uses for its funding, not based on some price tag that it creates, but based on the success of its graduates. So there's no tuition price. No matter your background, you're able to go to college. If you need room and board, covered. If you need textbooks, covered. You need help with transportation, it's covered. That's the Pinnacle. How do we fund it? Well, we thought about government funding, and the political situation was clearly not working at the time. And so we had to get creative. We had to think, okay, so how are we going to make this work? How are we going to get it funded? If politicians aren't funding higher education, maybe we can try something different. And so what we did was we developed a model in which the university's income is based on a small percentage of its graduates' earnings for a set period of time. So with Fix UC, we originally came out with 5% for 20 years, and that's it. There's no interest, no loan involved whatsoever. If you lose your job, what's 5% of nothing? Nothing. So it's based inherently on what you earn. It would be graduated up to a scale, so if you are right out of college, you can only get a part-time job, you wouldn't be on the hook for paying, because you'd have to earn a certain amount before you start contributing back to support currently enrolled students. And if your income goes up or down, it follows that. So it's inherently affordable. It's based on what you earn. So when we released this 9 months later, it felt like a baby because we worked on it for 9 months. It was more than just California that took notice. Within a few days, we were on news networks across the country, CNN, radio, TV, newspapers. The following week, the UC Board of Regents came to UCR for their meeting, and before I even got up to present it to the regents, the president of the UC at the time acknowledged the proposal, expressed his support, and said that he would be working with us to develop it even further. I was called up to Sacramento, and I met with lawmakers in Sacramento, asked to write legislation. Then I started getting calls from across the country. Ivy League schools, large public schools, small liberal arts colleges. They were all calling me up and saying, we really like this. We really, really like this. Can you make a Fix UC for us? I got more calls about legislation. I got calls from other state systems who adapted it to their states. And not long after we released this, it became really clear that this was something that's a lot bigger than the UC. It's something that could potentially change higher education across the country, particularly at a time where there's a lot of questioning about how we're going to fund higher education moving forward. And so that's what ultimately led me to create the Foundation for Innovation and Creative Solutions after I graduated. I decided that there needed to be a national version of this plan, and that's what ultimately became College 2.0. So how does College 2.0 work? So I briefly explained this. It's very similar to Fix UC, but with some important differences. So it starts with the institution. So say you want to go to UCR. UCR will invest in you. If you're accepted to UCR, or any school of your choice that's a College 2.0 school, by accepting you, they're basically saying, we're going to invest in you. The college will put up the money for whatever you need to make sure, no matter your background, you can go and get your education. You can focus on what's important. And then move on. You study without financial burden. Everything you need is covered. When you graduate and you get a job and you are in a well-paying career that you can live comfortably, then you would contribute a small percentage of your income for a set period of time. That percentage and that length is determined by each school. So you would basically choose a school based on what we call alum numbers, which is this percentage and the duration. So say the UC might be 5% for 20 years, or Cal State might be 3% for 14 years or something like that. And you can make an informed decision. You might compare schools based on what is their average graduate income, or what percentage of students are employed. So you'd be able to choose your school based on the value that it provides you. And you'd know clearly what your financial contribution will be. No more guesswork. Because the way the system works right now, students who are enrolling in college might not know how much they're going to have to take out in loans. They might not know what their tuition price is because it could be raised on them at any point. With this, you have absolute certainty. This is what you're going to be on the hook for, and it cannot be changed on you once you enroll. This is what you agreed to. And what we found is, even through this model, graduates would be contributing a lot less than what they would be otherwise. But because we have a large swath of students paying in, so 20 years, 5% for 20 years means there's 20 years worth of graduates who are each contributing 5%. But what that adds up to is enough to fund the amount of students currently enrolled. And what we did was we developed this algorithm that calculates all of this and makes sure that the college can stay afloat no matter what economy hits it. And so here's how it works for a student, or for a graduate. So you have no contributions whatsoever while you're enrolled. Once you graduate, let's say you get a part-time job. You're not making contributions yet until you hit this low-income threshold. And then after that, if your income ebbs and flows, your contributions react accordingly. If you lose your job, it stops. You don't have to pay anything because you can't. The other important thing about College 2.0 is the college's revenue depends on you being employed and finding success after you graduate. If you can't find a job, the school doesn't get paid. So then the school has a vested interest in making sure that you can find a job, a well-paying job, if you so choose. We've built in safeguards to make sure that a school isn't going to all of a sudden make all students go into engineering or business or what might be traditionally considered a well-paying career track. I don't have too much time to go into that, but we call it academic neutrality, in which we track how a college changes its funding mechanisms and favors certain majors over others to make sure that that isn't happening. Students still have the freedom to choose and study and work however they wish. But an important value to students, and once you graduate and you enter the job market, you find out how valuable this is. It creates an agency model for colleges in which they can bolster their career services to make sure that you're able to find a job, and they basically act as your agent in the job market. That differs wildly from the kinds of career services that you'll find now at college. So far I was talking about College 2.0 in general, but what I didn't say is our plan for public colleges. Okay? So College 2.0 is our base version of the plan that I envision primarily private schools using. It involves students paying a percentage of their income after they graduate for whatever they need. But we also developed a full public funding version of College 2.0, which we call State College 2.0. And so for any state that wants to participate, it's the state that ends up covering this percentage for its graduates. So how does that work? States on State College 2.0 will cover the expenses that are traditionally associated with tuition, fees, and even textbooks. Okay? So that base alum number percentage, whether it's like 5% or 4% or whatever it may be, it's the state covering that. Now, why would the state prefer that over, say, just funding college traditionally the way it does now? Basically a tax cut. That's the way it operates. It's a percentage of your income, and it's going directly to the institution that you attended. For anything else that you might need, the kinds of optional things that not every student is going to use, room and board, transportation, living expenses, anything like that, you'd have a much smaller percentage based on what you needed that you can take out. So you might be paying 0.75% of your income for a set period of time, just to cover whatever extraneous expenses you might have had, but that primary percentage is covered. So when I graduated and I was thinking about how do we apply some of these new ideas to higher education across the country, I wanted to make sure that we had a mission statement, something that we were working to, and a test that we could apply to whatever ideas that we were talking about to make sure that we were staying on the right track. And it consists of these few words here. Make college permanently affordable and accessible for all. Every word in that sentence is important. Make college. So the word make, it has to do something. It has to actually be implementable. Permanently. Whatever we institute, it's not going to be a short-term fix. It's going to be something that will work for the long term. Affordable. If students are going to be asked to pay, it has to be within their means. Accessible. Anyone from no matter their financial background, no matter what they want to do, will have access to the education that they choose. And for all, everyone is included. Anybody who wants a college education can get it. Okay, so you're probably thinking, okay, how does this compare to the other things that I've heard of? There are three headline alternative approaches that you might be familiar with. And I want to briefly address them and how College 2.0 differs. There's one important reason, but there are many others. The first is the pay-as-you-earn federal loan repayment plan. Okay, some of you might be familiar with this because it's a way that you can repay your student loans right now. Okay, this is available to you. The way it works is it basically takes any federal loans that you might have taken out for your college education, and once you graduate, instead of getting a bill from the Department of Education or whoever your student loan servicer is every month, you tell this the Department of Education how much you earn, and you are on the hook to pay 10% of your income toward your loan. Your monthly payments are capped at 10%. This is something that's fairly new. It was developed within the past 10 years. And there are pluses and minuses to that. It sounds pretty similar to College 2.0. It's based on a percentage of your income. And in that way, for some people, it can be much more affordable because their normal student loan payments may be much higher than 10%. However, there are a few things that are happening with it that are kind of scary, but I'll get to it in a second. I want to introduce each of these. The next that you might also be familiar with, that was talked about a lot in the previous presidential campaign, is Bernie Sanders' free tuition College for All plan. And it was introduced as legislation as well as the College for All Act. So the way College for All works is there would be a shared investment from the federal government and states to fully cover the tuition costs of students. Okay. And then we have private income share agreements, which are another alternative that are being discussed in the political sphere, in which private investors, banks, or financial companies would cover the costs of students to attend college, and then the students would pay the financial institution a percentage of their income for a set period of time after they graduate. Also very similar to College 2.0, and I'll get into why that is in a second. But it's not going to the college, it's going to the private investor. Okay. So what are some of the drawbacks for each of these? Okay, first off, with pay-as-you-earn, it relies on the FAFSA. It relies on the existing student loan system, which, as we talked about briefly, is deeply flawed. Okay? It still requires you to take out debt. As you're on the pay-as-you-earn plan, if your payments on that 10% are too low, you can actually accrue more interest than you would otherwise on your loan. So to protect against that, the government instituted a forgiveness plan where at the end of your set period of time, whatever's left over would be forgiven because they recognize that your interest on those payments could skyrocket. However, we're in an uncertain time when it comes to higher education policy in the federal government. There have been lawsuits filed around whether or not students are going to get that forgiveness once they hit it. And today it was announced that the first draft of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act would scrap this plan altogether. So it's very unclear how this is going to work if people are going to get those interest balances forgiven. Bernie Sanders' free tuition college for all. Okay, this is a hugely popular thing. It was definitely talked about and made some headline news during the last presidential election. But what are the obstacles to that? First off, it's a huge ask for states, especially states that aren't prepared or willing to pay for up to half of the entire higher education costs of their public institutions. It's pretty vague. If you've read the actual plan, there's not much detail to it. It's also widely susceptible to economic and political fluctuations. So we've had quote-unquote free college in the United States before. We've had it here in California. We've had it in New York. But what we found when researching higher education policy and looking into the history of it is anytime there is an economic hit, anytime there's a recession or the economy dips, state investment plummets, tuition goes up. It's that susceptibility to economic fluctuations, as well as political fluctuations. Parties in and out of power, different priorities, different groups struggling for power and for a limited amount of funding. There's no guarantee that this kind of thing won't suffer the same fate that free college here in California suffered back in the 1960s with the California Master Plan. In fact, I'll admit, when I started Fix UC, it didn't start as Fix UC, it started as the new California Master Plan. Because I wanted to recapture what we had achieved back then, and then I soon realized, after we dug into giant books of the California budget to look at what had happened over time, this stuff wasn't even digitized yet. We looked at how the relationship between college funding and the economy was inverse, and that kind of thing would be unsustainable if we didn't reimagine it somehow. And that's what College 2.0 aims to do. Not only that, but it doesn't include other expenses that primarily lead to debt, particularly for middle and low-income students. It's not a debt-free plan whatsoever. And then we have private income share agreements, which sound like a private version of College 2.0. And when I had done Fix UC, I had these banks, I had these investors come to me in my office at the Highlander and meet with me and ask me to bring Fix UC to these different companies. But what I found was, after I looked into it, was this wasn't going to satisfy much of the criteria that I had laid out with make college permanently affordable and accessible for all. First off, it doesn't benefit colleges whatsoever. Second of all, if you're an investor and you're looking for a good investment, you want to alleviate risk. So you want to choose the students with the highest earning potential. So already these kinds of programs are primarily focused on potential high earners, so those in engineering, business, so on, law school, medical, whatnot. This isn't the kind of broad thing that's going to alleviate student debt. It's going to help a small amount of those students who would be able to benefit from this. But even then, that benefit is called into question because there's no legal framework for something like this. There was a bill introduced by Marco Rubio 2 years ago that sought to create some regulations that would allow these investors to not, say, take advantage of students, and there would be a clear guideline to how this would work. But no such thing exists still. So it's a little bit of a wild, wild west out there when it comes to these kinds of agreements, and they definitely aren't for everyone. But the big thing, all of them, no matter what your political background is, whatever your ideology, whatever you support, none of them address the price of college. None of them. With each of these, if they were adopted on a wide scale, there's nothing to stop tuition and the price of college from continuing to go up. It's just people would take out larger amounts for each of those different plans. And with the College for All plan, the government would just be meeting whatever tuition is asked of them. and there was a vague request for colleges to keep tuition low, but we don't know what that would be. And it would be difficult to enforce. College 2.0 is the only plan that would actually increase the revenue for your college. Make sure the college gets more funding to make sure more students can attend by also bringing down costs. Well, how does that work? That's a big claim, right? Okay, so I'm going to dig into it as briefly as I can. The other thing I want to share is that College 2.0 exists in a series of documents that go heavy into research. I wrote a 150-page research report with over 350 citations. This stuff has been heavily looked at and analyzed. I can't get into all of the research. You are more than welcome to visit our website, fixamerica.org, that's FICSamerica.org, to read into it a lot more and to see what kinds of citations I've made for all of this to make sure that it's all grounded in evidence. But I have to gloss over everything in terms of an hour, so bear with me on that. But you can absolutely check my facts later. I welcome you to do it. Okay, so how does it raise revenue? Well, like I said earlier, it spreads out contributions among a giant group of people. I call this the Netflix approach. Okay. 10 years ago, if I were to come up to you and say, I can let you watch thousands of movies and TV shows, unlimited, as much as you want, for just less than $10 a month. You think, that's crazy. How is that sustainable? That doesn't work. But it's an economy of scale. If you have millions of people paying $10 a month, all of a sudden, they can get a lot more value. College 2.0 works the exact same way. If you have this massive amount of people who are paying a small amount every month for their education, it adds up to be enough to support the current students who are enrolled. There's no middleman whatsoever. There's no student lender that's taking interest out or is buffering students to prices. When you're shopping around for a school, you see that percentage, you see that duration, you see the average income, you see how many students are employed. You know exactly what you're getting. It rewards enrollment growth. Allowing more students to attend means more funding for the institution. It's stable and predictable. The algorithm that we've developed incorporates a widely inflated unemployment rate. We did this to make sure that even if we hit another Great Recession, that the university's revenue will still stay afloat. Okay, because we built it into the model. No matter what you throw at it, it will stay afloat. Cannot be said the same today. And it adjusts to the economy, naturally. How does it bring down costs? Well, so like I said, there's no middleman, there's no student loans. There's strong price competition between schools. This is a really important one. When you're choosing a college today, it's really difficult to know what your financial commitment is going to be. Colleges come up with this general sticker price that estimates what tuition, fees, room and board, all these different things are going to cost you. But it's really going to be different for every student. You don't know how much the FAFSA is going to say you're going to get in aid, how much you're going to need in loans. Sometimes you don't even know until after you file your statement of intent to register. And that's a big problem. It's hard for colleges to compete with one another on price when it's so obscured by all these different things. You don't know what exactly you're going to have to pay. If colleges were clearly displaying what their financial commitments would be, there'd be much more pressure on them to keep it down. There's no obscuring the financial commitment when it comes to College 2.0. That percentage, that length, that employment level, that income level, it's all right there. And you can know exactly what you're getting into. And it may be the case that you might see, UCR has a certain percentage, but a lot of its students are employed, and so it may have a higher percentage than another school, but if that employment rate and that income level is higher than this other school, a higher percentage might even pay off and may be worth it. That's a calculation that you can make clearly and know exactly what you're getting into. And then there's the benefit of the fact that that college needs to make sure that you're employed afterwards, so you're going to have that support if you have any trouble and you want that support. You don't have to also let your college help you with that, but you can. There's a natural price ceiling. Today, we have no idea how high tuition prices are going to go. We don't. It could keep on going up and up and up. There's nothing stopping it from going as high as it wants to. But with a percentage of your income, once you start getting into double digits, there's no way. 15, 20% of my income, no way. I'm not going to do it. Okay? There's a natural price ceiling that colleges cannot keep pushing up and up. If they want to raise their revenue, instead they got to make sure that their students are getting better job prospects or they're enrolling more students. And that's stuff that's inherently in students' best interests. It's what we call aligned incentives. The incentives of the college and the student are exactly the same. When I graduate, I want to make sure I can get a job. And the college depends on you getting that job. So if you need help with it, the college can help you. Not only that, but we introduce new efficiencies that I can get into if you'd like. It's really boring. That streamline a lot of what colleges do to make sure that costs are reduced and you're getting an affordable education. Okay, how am I doing on time, by the way? Good, how much time do I have?
15 minutes.
Oh, not enough time. Okay, all right, so one of the studies that we've done was we've measured what pushes up tuition prices. Why does tuition go up? What are all the costs that a college has to pay for? So they're the internal costs, like administration, faculty, pensions for those who have retired, capital projects, so buildings. Having more resources helps with your reputation, your prestige. So just having more money means more respect. Services that are provided to students. Financial aid is another expense. Student loans, if the school offers its own student loans, another expense. And then as well as the fact that quite often schools are very inefficient. They don't always have enough data that they need to understand what's going on across a giant university system. External factors that push up prices that are out of the university's control. Things like a fluctuating economy. Things like inflation. Things like benefits. If like healthcare costs go up and the school is paying the healthcare costs of its employees or even its students, that pushes up prices. Outside funding sources. So for public schools like the government, universities generally have investments. So if they have an endowment, they will have it invested in places. Sometimes those go up and down. As well as donations. You know, schools also rely on the donations of alumni and supporters, and those can fluctuate. And then rankings. One of the disturbing things that we're finding is university administrators are having increased pressure put on them to hit certain rankings goals. We've even seen college presidents in their contracts have to hit certain rankings goals, or they'll have bonuses tied to hitting certain rankings. And the better your resources are, it reflects well in rankings. There have been a number of studies done on the relationship between the amount of resources a school has and its level in rankings, and then they're very closely tied. But overall, the biggest, where both of these internal and external things meet, is competition for resources with other schools. Okay? Over the past 30, 40 years, competition between institutions has increased astronomically. Rankings are a part of that, but they're not the only thing. Students now are much more open to going out of state and far away from home to go to college based on rankings and prestige and what their job prospects might be. And that has elevated competition to new heights. Universities compete with one another for faculty to make sure that they can offer the best for their faculty, to make sure they're not poached by other universities. For students, for funding, for donations, competition heats up every single year. You think competition to get into college is tough. Competition between colleges is also cutthroat. So how does College 2.0 counterbalance all of that? Okay, we built in a series of downward pressures that make sure that we can achieve a sort of price equilibrium. So what are those? Internally, there's a pressure for new efficiencies and minimizing costs, because with College 2.0, schools all of a sudden can't just spike tuition when they need to. They have to be disciplined. They have to make sure that if they want to raise revenue, they're improving the outcomes for students. They're making sure that they're graduating more on time, getting jobs, getting well-paying jobs. It's not a willy-nilly thing that colleges can do. Their new cost responsibility. So one of the things I want to talk about later is on our plan, colleges are responsible for purchasing textbooks and education materials rather than students. Because what we found in the textbook market is there's a huge breakdown and prices are skyrocketing. And so we've streamlined that. Stable long-term revenue. So this is one of the biggest things that I can guarantee to college presidents is Right now, colleges from year to year don't know how much funding they're going to get, particularly public colleges. It's always a battle with state funders. How much are we going to get this year? How much are we going to get next year? On College 2.0, colleges can plan out years in advance what their funding is going to look like. It may change a little bit with the economy, but our algorithm allows colleges to understand much better what their finances are going to be and actually plan rather than use all this guesswork. Not only that, but College 2.0 relies on data, heavily on data. That's what makes our algorithm work. And so with that data comes a much better understanding of how the university runs. Externally, College 2.0 is responsive to the economy, make sure colleges will be resilient. It's a clear value-centric pricing. So like I said, students choose based on value. The college has to make sure that it's providing students with what they need. There's a natural price ceiling. Incentives for state investment that I'm going to talk about a little bit. And then the competitive advantage of College 2.0. Just the fact that if you are a College 2.0 institution competing with traditional institutions, the specter of mounting amounts of debt and the small percentage of your income, I think it's a pretty clear choice which is the better student experience. And overall, the most important is price competition with other colleges. To put it simply, College 2.0 institutions are going to beat traditional colleges, and they're going to compete more closely with their rival College 2.0 institutions, because students will be able to so clearly see what the different financial commitments are between colleges, and colleges then have to make sure that they're charging as low a percentage for a short amount of time as they possibly can. Because there's no hiding it. There's no like, well, okay, we're charging this sticker price, but that's not really your price. Wait until you check out your financial aid. There's none of that. And with both of those, we reach a price equilibrium. College 2.0 is a value-centric plan, okay, which a student would be able to make sure that they are getting the most bang for their buck. Or on a state College 2.0 system, that states are getting more bang for their buck. On state College 2.0, the state is only funding students who are working and are able to have an income that's assessed by the plan. So for instance, a student who may not be able to find a job, the state isn't paying anything to the college until that student is. So the college still has a vested interest in making sure that that student's able to find a job. And the state makes sure it's only funding success. When you read about the kinds of higher education policies that are being introduced, especially today with the higher education reauthorization proposal that was released this morning, it talks a lot about accountability. There's nothing better for accountability than making sure that the college isn't going to get paid unless its students succeed. That's ultimate accountability, and it's not something that's coming directly from the government, some arbitrary measure of what accountability or the college succeeding might be. College depends on making sure its students succeed. Not mandated by the government, but mandated by the students themselves. Textbooks. Really quick, I want to talk about textbooks. Textbooks are a textbook problem in economics, or what we call the principal-agent problem, in which those who are making decisions about what to purchase are different than those who are actually having to make the purchase. So when you have textbooks assigned for a class, it's your professor who's choosing the textbook, right? It's not you. And they're primarily choosing that textbook based on what they're teaching the class about, the quality of that textbook. Studies have shown that that is the primary consideration that professors take when they're choosing a textbook. They'll consider price, but it's much lower than ultimately what they need for their class. Okay? And what we've seen in textbook pricing is between 1977 and June 2015, textbook pricing has risen 1,041%. Okay? Textbook costs in many places can rival what people pay for tuition. And we can't let that keep happening. And so what College 2.0 does is it builds in some educational materials cost into students' alum numbers, so what they're paying for their education, if they're paying, or what the state might be paying. And instead, academic departments or professors are the ones who end up buying the books. So not only do they have to choose based on quality, but because it's their responsibility, excuse me, drinking water moment. Because it's their responsibility to buy the textbooks, they can then negotiate with publishers to make sure that they're getting the best deal possible and can bring prices down and bring some semblance of a rational and functioning market to textbooks, because it's completely unsustainable right now. Okay, so how will this happen? How much time do I got left? 5 minutes, okay. All right, so there are 4 different areas that can make something this big happen. Okay, number 1 is expert study. That's what we're focusing on right now. Is we're putting College 2.0 in the hands of experts who can provide more scholarly research to vet it, evaluate it, and put their stamp of approval to make sure that this ambitious plan that we've come up with is legit, that it's a real thing that college administrators can rely on. But there are other pieces of the puzzle as well. Public awareness. There has to be a movement behind this. Not only does the public need to understand it, but they need to support it enough to actually put political pressure on colleges and on Congress. So what has to happen in colleges? Well, primarily, most of the legwork happens on colleges themselves. This is primarily a plan for colleges. So colleges would basically change their financial structure themselves. And we at Fix America provide an advisory role to make sure that colleges can do that and use our algorithm. In Congress, there are 2 core pieces of legislation that would need to be passed. So some of you might be wondering, how does a student pay based on a percentage of their income? How does that work functionally? We designed a system for the IRS called the Send Safe program, in which you wouldn't have to do a single thing. Okay? When you graduate and you enter a job, you don't have to worry about paying for your education, because the IRS, as part of collecting all the other taxes right out of your paycheck, will collect this piece for you automatically and send it to the school. The IRS has a precedent of doing similar things, particularly even in higher education, notably for international students. But we would expand that to participating College 2.0 schools. And so it would come right out of your paycheck. You wouldn't have to worry about it. You wouldn't have to budget for it. It wouldn't be a bill. It would just be automatic. And that means it can change automatically if your income goes up and down. If you're being paid hourly and your income fluctuates from month to month, it will respond accordingly to make sure you're not paying more than you can afford. Secondly is coverage for veterans. So making sure that veterans on the GI Bill who have their educational costs covered will be able to attend College 2.0 schools and be able to do so using the same benefits that they enjoy today for their service. So briefly, this is our current tax system. Okay, you fill out your tax information, give it to your employer. Your employer withholds some of your income and sends it to the IRS. You, as an individual, prepare a tax return and send it to the IRS. That's how it works. This bottom part is what we introduced. So the participant, so that would be the graduate, would send a little income update to the college, just so the college knows how you're doing, what your income is. Because it can't get that information from the IRS. So one of the conversations I've had with politicians on Capitol Hill is, how might this work in practice? And the big thing that I heard from everybody of any political party is that there's no way the IRS is going to share information with anyone. So we had to do a workaround, and that's the income update. It would be fairly simple. It happened once a year, and no big deal. You could even just send your tax return. What the IRS would do, the new things that it would do, is it would receive information from the institution about what each student is on the hook for their College 2.0 withholding. They would send those back to the institution, so the college gets that revenue. And then they would just tell participants when their 15, 16 years or whatever it might be contributing is done. That's it. Most of this is already done, and the IRS already does it. The only really new thing that the IRS would do that it doesn't really do now is just sending contributions to institutions. And it's a fairly easy thing for the IRS to be able to do. So how do we do this? Okay, and how can you do it? So the first thing that I did when I graduated was I took an online course on how to start a startup. It was through Stanford. And one of the things that they talked about was design thinking. How do you apply this certain method to solving problems? And I put my own spin on it. Instead of starting a startup and creating an app, I'm starting a policy organization trying to solve student debt. So how am I going to do that? I called it the 4P process. Okay? You start off with, what is the purpose of what it is that you're tackling? So for higher education, I thought, okay, students getting a college degree. Okay, but what's the purpose of that? Why would someone get a college degree? Well, they get a job. Okay, well, why does someone need a job? To prosper in life and fulfill themselves. And so ultimately, what it came down to is to prepare people for life. That's the point of higher education. As broad and as core as it may be, higher education is to prepare people for life. Okay, what is keeping higher education from doing that? What is the problem that's keeping higher education from preparing people for life? In this case, finance, student debt, mounting tuition costs. That's our problem to solve. What would be the pinnacle? So remember I talked about when we were developing College 2.0, what we wanted to do, a system where any student would be able to get their education, be able to afford it. That was the pinnacle. And then we had to consider the practical. Okay, how would we do it? How would we bridge where we are today with that ideal of what we want to achieve? This is a cyclical process. This is a core part of design thinking in which you're consistently reevaluating your work. Okay, so as we thought, okay, well, we have this pinnacle, but the school still needs to get funded. How are we going to fund that? And then we came back and we figured out what the pinnacle is. If a student has to pay for college, what's the best way to do it? Based on what they earn, because that's inherently what affordability means, right? And so we kept refining, kept refining, kept refining. We started Fix UC in 2011. College 2.0 just finished this year. That's a long time that we continuously refined this. And eventually landed on College 2.0. I would recommend that you try this process for anything that you're passionate about. It'll help. It'll also allow you to get to something that you're continuously refining, but you'll at least have something to show for it. Even a few years ago when I came to talk at the UCR School of Public Policy last time, we were knee-deep in College 2.0, but I was still able to talk about it a little bit because we were just in this process. Why is this process important? Why is what you all are doing, why is that important? Okay. So often in public policy, we are analyzing and evaluating policy proposals, ideas, things that are being put forth by politicians and experts and whatnot. I think the key to the kinds of divisions that we're seeing right now in our country are going to be new ideas. Ultimately, that's going to be what heals us. That's going to be what unites us. One of the eye-opening experiences that I had as a student when we released Fix UC was the first 2 phone calls that I got from politicians. First 2. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. They both wanted to see it happen. As a young person, I was thinking, there's no way. Do they know what they're talking about? Like, since when does that happen? But when you approach a problem in a new way, thinking creatively, thinking innovatively, you have the potential to bridge these divides. People haven't gone into their silos. People haven't determined, okay, this is a Republican issue or a Democratic issue or a solution on either side, on the right or the left. You can forge ahead in a new way. You can form a new coalition of people, and it may span the spectrum, or at least new parts of the spectrum. Okay. I see a lot of young people in this room. Our generation is having to deal with these divisions. It's keeping legislation from happening, and it's keeping solutions from happening. If we're going to really start solving things, I think it's going to take some new thinking. And I would encourage you to take a chance and try something new. I hope that my story can be an example of the fact that you can make a difference. And I look forward to seeing what you all come up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LoCascio. At this time, I would like to open it up to the audience for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Regarding the algorithm.
What's your name?
Patrick.
Patrick, nice to meet you, Patrick.
Nice to meet you. I was just curious about the algorithm. Did
Yeah.
you factor in the whole dropout rates and everything? Because obviously nothing goes through, and then fluctuation in the dropout rates.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So this algorithm, it took us. So we made a rudimentary version for FIX-UC specifically for the University of California, taking into the way the University of California functions. But then once we started this organization and started working on College 2.0, we had to come up with an algorithm that works for any college across the country. And that's what ultimately took the most time, is 3 years. Is we started from scratch and we built this algorithm, had to think about every possible combination of dropout rates, or students leaving and coming back, or students completing at different times, and every student costs a different amount of money. I mean, one of the things about tuition is people often think that a tuition price or a sticker price is the cost to educate a student, which it isn't. In some cases it may be more or maybe less. That's not really helpful when you're trying to manage college finance. So we had to basically break down every element of a college budget, everything that goes into it, break down the way that students behave when they're in college, and even after college, because we had to factor in, not only people while they're in college dropping out and leaving and taking gaps and coming back, but also those people who are doing that in the workforce. So it's a gigantic calculation that we tailor to every school that we will work with. Depends on whether the school's public or private or whatnot. But yeah, it had to be robust enough to take into account all of those different things, and we still tweak it for every school.
So in theory, you could just not work for 10 years. Let's say you had like some nest egg, and then you don't pay those 10 years worth of income.
Yeah, I mean, so we actually looked into that. We had to study what kind of students might be free riders, the free rider problem in economics, right? And we found that the amount of people who go to college but then like just avoid getting a job or don't want to get a job is minuscule. Minuscule. And so that isn't largely a problem that most universities have to face. But there are universities that are different. So one thing that's peculiar about some universities, like take the Ivy League schools, like the prestigious private schools, have a much higher number of students who get their income from investments or alternative income rather than your traditional employment income. So the calculus has to change for those schools, but that's not really an issue for, say, like a public school like the UC. It's a fraction of income. So we have to tailor everything to each school, but the algorithm itself is a core thing that we just shape for every use case. And we can also study, so if there's a school that has a lot of dropouts or has a not very high graduation rate, it's a more difficult proposition for them. We change the percentage that school would charge to account for that. And some schools might just not be able to use it because you have to graduate students. If your school has like a 20% graduation rate, it won't work.
So doesn't that create the other problem where the school is so incentivized to graduate you that you might not be as qualified for the workforce?
If a college is graduating you and you're not prepared for the workforce, then the college isn't going to survive because it depends on you going into the workforce. It's inherently incentivized that you have to succeed, you have to be earning an income. If that degree isn't worth anything, the college will fall flat. The degree has to be worth something for you to be able to get that job and then to be able to support the institution. Otherwise, it won't work, right?
Yeah, I guess. Like, the whole fake it till you make it thing. Some people are, you grasp on the job, but then you're not qualified going into the job. You're making that income, but it won't be for long. I was just curious. I was just like running ideas through. I like the idea. I like the.
No, I love that. I hope that you all have critical questions because that's ultimately how we developed this. We were our own best skeptics. So when we were in the Highlander office developing this first foray into this, every whiteboard, every one of these exact same whiteboards, the same size, we had maybe 12 of them over the whole office, writing text this big, filled all 12 of those whiteboards with problems, with questions, with things that had to be worked out in order to develop it. We developed this whole plan by criticizing ourselves, being, okay, this won't work because of this won't work because of that. And we checked each one of those off, and that's how we developed the plan, is by answering each of those questions. So please be critical. Next.
In order for this program to actually be implemented, you would have to guarantee schools a specific amount of funding that they already have until they reach critical mass for their students.
Exactly.
Isn't that a massive amount of public money that would be going
Good question. I completely glossed over that. Really good. I'm glad that you brought that up. Okay, so part of what we do as an organization when working with schools to do this is we develop a plan for transitioning. I actually took the slide out because I thought it would be way too boring, but you asked, so I'll get into it. So the way it works is we phase schools into this, because you're exactly right. If all students were paying through College 2.0, this college would have to fund all of those students up front. That's a massive amount of money. So what we have to do is phase it in with a small group at first who have all their costs covered. They graduate and start paying back, and then it grows. More and more students are able to attend on the College 2.0 plan. Fewer have those upfront costs until all students at the institution are paying through College 2.0. There's still a little like nest egg. There's still that capital investment that needs to be covered. But we are able to basically shape that based on the institution's resources. If it's a public school, if the state's covering it, we can work with the state on making sure that that's within its budget. We can also craft specific fundraising campaigns or whatever it may be to make sure that we hit that target to get the capital going, and then it starts to pay for itself. Yeah, of course.
And would the gradual implementation of it be based off of like a random selection of people who are admitted, or would it be need-based, so the people who most need financial help?
That's going to be up to the school. So we leave that up to the school because every school is different. Schools have different amounts of need-based or low-income students who need it. And when we developed this, we had to walk a fine line because I developed really good relationships with university administrators, interviewing them, getting to understand what they need, how this might work with their particular institution. And what I learned was I can't dictate too much with this. I can provide them with the basic outline, but that's one of those decisions that the exploratory committee and the regents or trustees or whoever runs the university would ultimately have to decide for themselves. It can be done either way. One of the debate over it is we could do a random selection of students, or we could have students opt in. Students like self-select, they say we want to do it, and then the university chooses from amongst them. There are a lot of different approaches to doing it, but that choice oversteps where I think we can dictate the university. The university has to maintain its own independence and its own identity kind of debate. And that's also something that students at that university can help decide too. Students might say, we want this to be need-based, or we want it to be done a certain way. That's a really good question. Any others?
Actually, before the next question, what if we show the Fix America video?
Oh yeah, absolutely, that'd be great. So it's 4.5 minutes long. Do we have enough time for more questions after that? Okay. It's a really cool video. I want to show it.
Bachelor's, her parents or family been able to pay for it.
Can we start at the beginning?
Any worries. Now that she was going back to school so many years. After my parents got divorced, my mom went back to school to get her teaching credential. When she had gotten her bachelor's, her parents or family been able to pay for it without any worries. Now that she was going back to school so many years later, she had to put the entire thing on a credit card. It was really scary.
So me, my brother and sister all graduated high school within 2 years of each other. My mom works a minimum wage job. My stepdad's a high school teacher, so there wasn't a lot of money to go around.
I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and I also attended college while my siblings were in college. My father has been disabled since I was in 5th grade. My mother is an agricultural worker. She works in a packing house.
Growing up, my mom was a single parent, so I wasn't extremely worried about paying for college because I knew there was going to be a lot of scholarships, there was going to be opportunities for me to pay for it.
I went to the community college to save some money, but when I transferred, I still graduated with a lot of debt.
I worked 2 jobs throughout college just to make a living.
So it was difficult for us to pay for college, so we ended up with loans as high as $40,000.
But actually entering it, I didn't realize how many loans I was going to have to take.
Soon thereafter, my twin sister and I were also going to college. And having all 3 of us in school at the same time was really hard.
There are millions of stories just like these. Each year, more students graduate with even more debt. That's why a group of students and recent grads came together to design what we call College 2.0. It's an entirely new way of funding higher education that we spent 5 years developing from the ground up with just one goal in mind: make college permanently affordable and accessible for all. Here's how it works. This is Tim and this is Lucy. They're both graduating from high school soon and looking to go to college. Tim is considering traditional colleges like the ones we know of today. Lucy, on the other hand, wants to go to a College 2.0 school. Let's see how their experiences compare. When choosing a college to attend, one of the most important factors a student can consider is cost. Tim's traditional college choices each advertise their sticker price, but he doesn't know how much financial aid he'll receive, if any. Each school also offers a long list of additional expenses he might be on the hook for, leaving Tim with a ton of confusion and guesswork about which school is right for him. Lucy's College 2.0 options provide her with different information. College 2.0 schools don't charge students any upfront costs, and instead have students contribute a small percentage of their income after they graduate for a set period of time. That's it. To choose the right fit for her, Lucy simply compares the percentage and duration of each school, called alum numbers, and the average graduate income for each. Once Tim starts school, he has a bill for tuition, room and board, and all of his expenses, so he takes out a loan, which begins accruing interest immediately. Lucy, on the other hand, attends her College 2.0 school without any financial burden. Even her textbooks are covered. Each semester, Tim goes through the same process, except room tuition goes up. Lucky for Lucy, once she's agreed to her alum numbers, they can't be increased on her. Fast forward to graduation. Tim is sweating because his loan bill has ballooned and he still hasn't found a job. Lucy hasn't either, but that's okay, because she won't have to contribute until she does. Since her college's funding depends on her income, she's letting her school help her find her dream job. Tim then chooses between his goal of starting his own business and taking a job that will help him pay off his loans. Tim's company goes bankrupt, but his loan bills keep coming. Lucy gets laid off? No worries. The algorithm powering College 2.0 makes sure she'll be okay until she finds a new one, and so will her college. When Lucy gets a super high-paying job? No worries. College 2.0 has a cap on how much she can contribute each year. Whatever life throws at her, College 2.0 responds accordingly. After 15 years, Lucy's contributions funded more students to attend college just like she did, and now she's done. Tim put off buying a house and starting a business, even starting a family, and he still has a few more years to go. Share the plan with administrators, professors, friends, family members. Spread the word. College's next big upgrade is here. Visit fixamerica.org today to learn more.
All right. So, any more questions?
For the state
Yeah.
College 2.0,
Yeah.
how are you factoring in out-of-state and international students?
Good question. So out-of-state and international students wouldn't clearly be subsidized by the in-state contribution that we currently know of today, right? Because the way in-state tuition works is it's basically founded upon the fact that these students are coming from families that are paying taxes. And so the calculus goes that if they're paying taxes, then they're factored into and can enjoy that lower rate. It works similarly on our plan as well. So generally there would be a small increase in percentage for out-of-state and international students. That would basically depend on the state, but it wouldn't be as big of a spike in percentage as we see between in-state and out-of-state, partially because it would be a huge disincentive for out-of-state and international students to attend if all of a sudden, a 5% rate jumped to 10%. So instead we have to look at like 1 or 2% as being the most that we can tack on for those out-of-state students to make up for the funding gap, but it still has to be competitive. And so our algorithm takes that into account to make sure that those state colleges can still accommodate those students. It's a good question.
What if we have students who come to College 2.0 but then they choose to work outside of the United States?
That's a good question. So one of the reasons that we include or we use the IRS rather than say like the state's tax collecting agency or even the schools themselves or banks or whoever else might collect this is because the IRS has the best ability to track students when they leave. Because even today you might leave and have financial obligations that might need to be kept track of. So the IRS could do that. Like if we were to do this just through, like, say, the California Franchise Tax Board, which collects state taxes, wouldn't have nearly the capability to do that. So it basically falls on the IRS. That's why the IRS is involved, is because they can handle that kind of thing. They do it all the time. That's a good question.
So in your model, I mean, you're essentially tying college funding to career success, right? Salaries. Some might argue that not all colleges or universities are set up for that kind of career success model.
Right.
I mean, we see more and more universities and colleges moving in that direction,
Yeah.
career services folks. I guess what's to stop in this model? There are some who would probably argue that, like you mentioned, there's more to college than just getting a job. It's preparing students for life, and life doesn't necessarily always mean career. So what is to stop, say, some critics who might say you're distorting kind of the intention of academia?
Right.
What's to stop academic classes exploring theory, learning for learning's sake, to not going into just kind of a narrow, everything that you do here is
Right.
career.
That's a good question. That's a good question. So, a little background on me. I was a political science and English major. So, coming from the English department, I hear you. Okay. And so there are a lot of aspects of College 2.0 that tackle that exact thing. So first off, the thing that I like a lot about it is, unlike a loan, you have complete freedom to do whatever you want on your plan. You don't have to make different career choices because you have that student loan bill. We see that all the time. If you have a huge amount of student debt, you may not be able to take that passion job that you might want. Working for a nonprofit or an NGO, you might have to take the other high-paying job that you may not be passionate about. Okay? We have built in a series of incentives that alumni can do to actually bring down their percentage. One of them is going into public service. So if you go into public service, we knock you down your percentage. We have also suggested, it's not a mandate of our proposal, but suggested that if an alum becomes a mentor to students, that we could even include a percentage decrease there. So having been a mentor here at UCR, I'm a big fan of mentorship, and I think that can actually really help a university experience. So that could be one way that you bring down your percentage as well. But ultimately, this is a college finance model, and we have to find a way to pay for it. And you can't pay for college with life, right? You have to pay for money, pay with money. So that's ultimately why people are paying this, because they're paying with money. The thing that I had to gloss over, that I didn't get to talk about because I thought it would be too boring, is academic neutrality. So it's this measurement that we do as part of our algorithm and part of our process of working with colleges, in which we look at the university's finances, we look at their practices, we look at their recruiting, we look at their career services. And we don't necessarily obligate that a university fund all departments and all disciplines the same, because every college is different. A school might have a particularly big engineering department. We're not going to say, okay, your humanities department has to be the same size. What we do measure is the change in all of those areas after implementing College 2.0. So if all of a sudden, the humanities department was getting funded at, like, say, 20% of the academic budget, engineering 30%, but after implementing College 2.0, humanities goes down to 5% and engineering goes up to 45%, then we take a look at that. We investigate what that is. We look at, see if the college is pushing students into particular majors, into these traditionally lucrative majors. And how do we enforce something like that? We created this academic neutrality score that we would post publicly. So we would rate schools. It's a detailed rating. It's not just down to one number. But basically show students, look, this is what the college is doing. It's a huge incentive for colleges to just be mindful of this, to not turn into just a career mill, but also consider all students and what they may choose to study. It's a helpful sign for students to know what they're getting into. And I think it can counterbalance the concern that you brought up, that these institutions are just going to change to just only serve certain careers. But at the end of the day, even with all those protections that we built in, still has to be paid for. And the way we pay for it is money. And so we didn't start off creating this with an explicit goal of turning colleges into that. It was a byproduct of the fact that how else are students going to pay for it? And in the case of State College 2.0, it makes sense for states because the revenue that states are getting is based on what people earn. And the state's contribution to the college would be based on that exact same thing. It would be much more affordable for a state because it's based on what tax revenue they're getting. That's a much easier sell than the state paying whatever tuition the college charges, whatever that might be. So we just saw that as being the best way of what was available. That's a really good question. I'll answer it.
Talking about a roadmap, and I think this is really cool. I like, I saw it, read an email, thought this was be interesting to attend. Do you currently have in mind an ideal place where you could set this up, show people that it works, and expand from there? Or would it start kind of whoever wants to opt in across the country can opt in? Or even would you consider implementing this in an emerging market and then showing people this works?
So that's a really good question too. We have certain test cases that we want to experiment with. We have a handful of colleges who are looking at it right now, primarily public schools. But ultimately, yeah, we'll need to showcase how this works for a small private liberal arts college. We'll need to showcase how it works for a public school, for a major private university. We'll need to illustrate that. One of the ways that we help put universities at ease through this process is we have a virtual pilot. So what we do is we basically boot up our algorithm, we tweak it to whatever that university needs, and then we ask the university, okay, could you give us some examples of things that might happen to your university? Say, your state gets the country experiences a recession, or maybe there's a certain industry or a career field that falls out. We can run that through the algorithm and see what happens. And we can show to the university that no matter what you throw at it, the university will be able to sustain itself. So that way we're kind of showing what could happen. We're forecasting out what the university would experience. But ultimately, yeah, we're going to want to showcase on a small scale how it works at different universities. And it's going to take all four of those pieces of the puzzle coming together. Because part of this relies on congressional action. So they have to allow the IRS to collect it. More experts agreeing with what we're saying is going to help. Public awareness. A college president would be putting their career on the line if they said, we're going to implement College 2.0, but nobody's heard of it. They're like, whoa, 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 what are you doing, right? So all of those have to fall into place, and it's going to take time. Any change as big as this. I've been working on this for 6 years, and we're getting closer, but it's still going to take time. But yeah, we are definitely going to do our virtual pilots, but we also are going to eventually do the real.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have, but I would like to thank Mr. LoCascio once again for this talk, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.